In the Talmud, there is a story in Tractate Ta'anit on page 23a. The story goes something like this. There's a man called Honi, and Honi is walking down the pathway. He's walking down the road, and he sees another man. And the other man is planting carob saplings. He's planting some trees. Well, Honi looks at this guy and says, wow, you are very busy at work right now, and I love carob. I assume you love carob. Perhaps we here don't necessarily like carob, but imagine it's like chocolate. He's planting chocolate trees. And Honi says to this unnamed gentleman, when are we going to get our chocolate? Like, when are these trees going to produce the carob that we can snack on and it will be delicious? The unnamed man says, in about 70 years. Oh, in 70 years, these little saplings will have they'll be the right size, we'll be able to pick them, we'll be able to grab the carob and to turn it into desserts. Honi is kind of like jaw on the floor, kind of shocked. He says something that maybe in polite company we wouldn't say. He says, do you really think you're going to be alive in 70 years in order to pick this carob, in order to get this fruit from this tree? Okay, probably we shouldn't say things like that, but it's the first thought that he has, is that this guy isn't going to be here in 70 years. Let's imagine the person who's planting the carob tree is in his 30s. That would make him in his 100s in 70 years. The unnamed gentleman turns to Honi and says, I came into this world where carob trees had already been planted. I plant for the future generations. Oh, what's the unnamed gentleman saying? That everything within this world is a gift of hope, or perhaps a gift of joy from our previous generations. And even though they might not, or we too, we might not necessarily be around to enjoy the carob of our labor, we've all come into a world that already has all these gifts. How can we not plant those same treats? How can we not plant that same joy or that same carob for the future generations? This idea is taught in the Talmud, Masachet Ta'anit 23a. And I found it peculiar that in this week's Parsha, there's a parallel story. There's a parallel story that was written by the rabbis of a slightly later generation. So if we're dealing with a Talmudic story, then we can imagine it was written sometime between the years of 200 and 500. And there's a midrashic collection, there's a rabbinic collection called Bereshit Shemot Rabbah, and in Shemot Rabbah, which is from like the 500s and the 600s, there's almost the exact same story related to our Parsha. Almost the exact same story. The rabbis who are crafting this story are looking at our Parsha, looking at Parsha Truma, and if you still have your Chumash in front of you, I'm on page 493. That's Shemot chapter 26, verse 15, on page 493. And in that part of the Parsha, and going on for like 2 pages, the Torah is very, very invested in wood, in wooden planks, in wooden beams that are going to be used to build the Mikdash, are going to be used to build the tabernacle. Now, I am not a math person, but if we were to count up the amount of wooden planks that are listed beginning around page 493, And if we were to think about how large these wooden planks are, they are huge. So each of the wooden planks is 10 cubits. That's how tall they are. So a cubit, an amaz, the distance from your elbow to the end of your finger. I am very short, and I have short forearms. But if we multiply this times 10, and we're talking about something that is, it's definitely more than 10 feet tall, a piece of wood that is more than 10 feet tall. The rabbis of our tradition ask a very good question, where they say, where in the world did Bnei Yisrael get these giant pillars of wood in the wilderness? There's not huge, giant cedar trees where they are. So how in the world can they build the Mishkan? How in the world can they make this tabernacle happen? Well, some of the rabbis of our tradition, like Abarbanel lived in the 1400s in very urban Portugal, and Abarbanel said, this is not a difficult question. There are always traders within the world, and when Bnei Yisrael wanted to build the Mishkan, then traders who were selling giant planks of cedar wood were able to come in and to help them. Thank you, Abarbanel. But the early rabbis, the ones after the Talmud, but not that much after, the ones who are writing Breshit Rabbah and Shemot Rabbah, they teach this wild story. So they teach that once upon a time, there was a man named Abraham. Remember him? Abraham and Sarah, the very beginnings of Judaism. And Abraham, the very beginnings of Judaism, Abraham goes to Beersheba and he plants cedar saplings. He plants little tiny plants, a whole orchard of cedar saplings. And then the Midrash teaches it gets better. Jacob, who had 12 sons, Jacob, who traveled with his family down to Egypt, when Jacob decides to move to Egypt to be with Yosef, his son, who's like a chancellor, and says, come here, it's all good. When Jacob decides to move to Egypt, he goes to Beersheba, he digs up the plants, the cedar trees that Abraham had planted, and he digs them up in such a careful way that he can replant them in Egypt. So what were smallish trees in Beersheba are then replanted in Egypt and grow and grow and grow and grow until they are more than 10 amot high. They are giant cedars because Bnei Yisrael our spiritual ancestors are in Egypt in slavery for quite a few hundred years, so these trees have lots of time to mature. And then the rabbis of our tradition say that when Bnei Yisrael leaves Egypt in freedom, when they're released from Pharaoh's bondage, they go to those very same cedar trees that had been planted by Abraham originally. They cut them down and make them into wooden planks, and they carry them with them across the Sea of Reeds, across the Split Sea, all the way to Har Sinai, all the way to the mountain, all the way past that, where they then use those very same planks in order to build the Mishkan. It's a very unlikely story, because how would Bnei Yisrael know that they were going to need to build a tabernacle? Why in the world would people who are leaving slavery, why would they carry with them tons and tons of planks of wood? I think it all comes back to joy. I think it all comes back to that initial Talmudic story about planting for our future generations. Well, what are these two stories about? I think that they're about our hope within Judaism and our outlook within Judaism and our resiliency within Judaism. So in every generation, b'chol dor vador, chayav adam l'rod al atzmo, we are obligated to see ourselves as if we ourselves had left Egypt. In every generation. What does that mean? It means that in every generation, we recognize that the Jewish people have experienced struggles and have come through as free on the other side. We live at a time where Matisyahu concerts are being canceled. We live at a time where it's not so easy to be a Jewish college student or a Jewish high school student. It's not so easy to be Jewish within our world. Definitely. It is hard. It is hard these days. But the story from Honi and the Carib and the story from Abraham planting the planks of cedar that would someday be used to build the Mishkan, they're both about having this future vision of what Judaism can be. And they're both about, I think that they're both about focusing in on joy within our faith, joy within our tradition, that is the legacy that we want to plant, that is the sweetness that we want to plant. And if that's what we want to see, then we have to live it out within this world. So I know that for me, my legacy, I hope, is Jewish joy. Like, the Torah delights me, I feel surrounded by Hashem, and I strive to live my life with kindness. All of those things bring me joy. Oh, and like Abraham and the mysterious stranger who's planting the trees, I don't know exactly what planting this joy is going to bring about within this world, but I think that the roots of it are what's truly important, more so than my fears or than my anxieties about being Jewish. Just like my ancestors planted Jewish joy for me, then that's what I'm planting. That's what I'm choosing to plant within this world. Oh, I hope that through the message of this Shabbat that we have within ourselves the strength and the resiliency to plant the joy for Judaism that we want to see within the world. Shabbat Shalom.